Welcome back to the Bill and Doug Show. Doug Lesmerises joined by a very special guest. He's as good as it gets. He's Joshua Perry, former Ohio State Buckeye, great linebacker, national champion, leading tackler, now media mogul with NBC Sports. Joshua, thank you for joining us here on the Bill and Doug Show.
No, I appreciate your time. I've been anxious to come on this show. As you know, we've got a relationship that goes back some years, but have always appreciated the work that you've done. So excited to be here.
Well, I just, back in the day, I thought to myself, this is the best dressed leading tackler that I've ever come across. I can always just remember Joshua Perry. You get on the field, he'll wrap you up and take you down, but off the field, it's all put together. So you're doing a great job with NBC Sports. Excited to see all the success you've had in your career. We're going to talk a little ball here. And Joshua, I do want to start off. I know that you know the entire sport. You talk about everything on NBC Sports with you and Nicole Auerbach and the entire team over there. But I do want to delve into your Buckeye roots here for a second, if you don't mind. Bill Landis and I have kind of thrown out this theory this year about this Ohio State team trying to repeat as national champions. And we have kind of come around to the idea that actually having so many guys in starting roles who were not there a year ago, you would have thought and said, oh man, they lost 8 starters on defense and they lost the quarterback and they lost the 2 running backs and Emeka Egbuka and all these guys. And you would have maybe thought that was a negative. But I think the way it's turned out, you actually can feel some of the energy of guys like Jermaine Matthews and Arvell Reese and guys who did not have as big a roles last year, Carnell Tate. And I feel like it's helping to drive this team a little bit. When you guys were trying to repeat in 2015, so many of you were back and you thought, man, look at all this talent that's back from a national championship team. Do you think there could be anything to the idea of actually having some guys on the way up in new roles can actually maybe help a team when they're trying to do it back to back?
Yes. I was actually workshopping that idea earlier in the week. We've got UCLA, Ohio State on NBC in primetime this week. And so, we're trying to dive into how this team for Ohio State has been built and their chances to repeat. And it's the thing that I think about. So to your point, you have a bunch of guys who in the offseason basically were like, we haven't won a thing. Right. There were great players from last year's team that aren't here. We haven't done very much. So we desire to, as a completely different team, feel the glory that those guys were able to achieve last year. And we were a part of it, but we weren't really in the mix. And in 15, we had everybody back. Ezekiel Elliott's back. Mike Thomas is back. Darren Lee's back. I'm back. Joey Bosa's back. You go through the whole list of names, guys who were impact players on a championship team. And our offseason sounded very different, right? It was who's going to NBA All-Star during the offseason. And we've got a trip to make to the ESPYs because we were nominated for Team of the Year. Who is Jerry Emick going to pick to go out there to LA and to schmooze with all of the biggest athletes in the sport during that event, right? And so I think we got to a point where we believe we hung the moon and you can't get there. So early in the year, maybe there were some issues that we overlooked because we said we're veteran and we're just more talented than everybody. And you get to that critical game where you're facing a Michigan State, who is a team that isn't going to quit and they're going to fight, whether they have a backup quarterback plan or not. And you're just not on your A game. The game plan's not coming together the way you thought. And you're not prepared to get into a dogfight like that. I don't see that in this current team because so many of these guys have things to prove. They don't have a legacy from a year ago that they can hang their hat on and say, I was truly the reason why, one of the big reasons why. So I do think it's actually a benefit to them. Like the coaches could go into that room anytime those guys think that they're just balling. Arvell Reese is potentially the top NFL prospect this year. And Matt Patricia and Ryan Day have the opportunity to go into the room and look at him and say, you think you're good. You haven't done a thing yet. You might be the top prospect. What have you done? What awards have you won? What championships have you brought back here? And I think it's an intriguing spot for those guys to be in because that's part of the motivation.
Yeah. And I really do think that it is going to affect how I view every champion in college football, maybe in other sports, but probably more in college football because it is young people. There is change is part of college football. But In the past, I would have said, man, there's so much back. That's great. I think going forward, I'll think, man, it's great to have a guy like Caleb Downs back and a guy like Davidson Igbinosun back and a guy like Sonny Styles and Jeremiah Smith. You don't want to be all new guys, but you can feel, I think, the energy in this team, and it feels like they've almost hit the sweet spot because the talent is still immense, Joshua. Like, obviously,
Yes.
we're running through guys, but there's nothing that it's not old hat. And
Right.
like when you watch this Ohio State team, they're not perfect. Of course, they're not perfect. But I mean, you do go through things. It's hard to find fatal flaws or things that
Right.
you really say like, oh, is there, like when you watch Ohio State, what are the things that there's no guarantees? Bounce of the ball. There's other great teams out there. Indiana is great. Somebody from the SEC is going to rise up and play well in the playoff. Do you see things like, what do you think could hold Ohio State back at this point?
That's one of the more interesting questions because I am a full believer that there's still another level to this team that just hasn't been revealed.
Okay.
And people have talked about the pace of play. Jake Butt did a phenomenal job on the broadcast last week when Ohio State was playing Purdue, talking about how they've played. And I think part of it is schematically, you kind of see new wrinkles that'll pop up as they get deeper into the year. But the idea is they've played so slow on purpose that, if there is a game where they decide we're going to go tempo, we're going to max out reps, etc. Like, I mean, they're probably hitting Jeremiah over the top 3 or 4 times in that case, and Carnell Tate's getting his as well. And, the defense is going to get him the ball back. Now, when I watch, I think defensively, one of the things that is the give and take there is when you have a coordinator that is so multiple and you mix up personnels and you mix up alignments, sometimes a guy is not where he's supposed to be pre or post snap, and that can lead to a crease. Now, this is a defense that doesn't really give up anything, and part of the reason is you've got dudes that cover up mistakes. Arvell Reese, his closing speed, he covers up mistakes. The same thing with Sonny Styles on the linebacker level, covers up mistakes, and then Caleb Downs is a big eraser when he's playing from deep. So it doesn't necessarily kill you, but do you get into a matchup where maybe talent's equated, and all of a sudden a guy's not there, and that can become a big play? It's a question I have. It's not been an issue. The biggest question for me is the offensive line and the run game for Ohio State and what they're doing at right guard. And I was watching the Purdue tape, and one of the things Purdue did really well was they moved their defensive line a ton. Those guys were stunting. They were switching out gaps. And so you've got the offensive linemen now that have to move their feet maybe in a way that they didn't believe they did. You've got linebackers that are able to get downhill aggressively, and that can be a problem. So I think the offensive line has to get better. I think that defenses are going to try to be as chaotic as possible to cause some issues in the run game. But the thing that, to me, I think is a positive in the run game, those backs are rarely in a situation where they're falling backwards when they get tackled. They finish plays. They have really good finishers. And so that takes a 2-yard run into maybe like a 3.5-yard run. And maybe you were looking to get 5 or 6, but you're still in a manageable down and distance situation. So again, like their issues, I feel like are things that we want to nitpick, right? And it's like, I felt it as a player. It's what I do now when I'm in the media. But like when you're looking at Ohio State, the biggest thing you're doing is nitpicking, like, oh, what about this? What about that? They're a really good football team, but if there were concerns, those would probably be the 2 things for me.
It is hard. It's like, oh, the number 1 defending national champs, only 19 of their 22 starting spots are playing elite level football. Like, let's go through the 3 where it's like, that could be a little bit better. It is a difficult thing. It's hard to find context sometimes, but I think this, Joshua. The thing about Ohio State is the best standard for Ohio State is Ohio State. And that Ohio State has created a standard for itself. And a lot of times, especially in the Big Ten, and obviously you see Indiana rising up, what Oregon is now, Michigan just won a national championship. There are other great programs, but to try to compare, like, well, Ohio State, if you were another team, like, you'd feel pretty good about this. The Ohio State standard is Ohio State. And so, and they like, right. You knew that as a player. These coaches and players know that. You want to be held to the highest possible standard, but sometimes that can feel like nitpicking a little bit. But it's sort of life in like life in the big city, as Urban used to say, right? That's life at Ohio State.
No doubt. And like I think it's interesting listening to Ryan Day this year, where like I think he's fully embraced this idea of we've got to get better incrementally in the margins. And there's not a ton that has to change, but all those little things that you dial in end up being something pretty big. And so he's nitpicking now, where he talked
Yes.
about changing the way that he grades out champions. It's not an 80% anymore. You got to grade out 83 or better, right? And it's just, he's like, don't feed into all the great things that people are saying. Like, you have to look at yourself as critically as possible. And it's what you have to do, because unfortunately the standard has been elevated, right? Like when
Yes.
I was playing there, we were double digit wins. Like, we knew that was what it was. We're competing for a championship, but we were also in a spot where it's like, if we can win the Big Ten and play in a New Year's Six bowl game like that, we're checking boxes of like really good year. New Year's Six really doesn't exist in the way that it used to anymore. That's unfortunate to me, but like, these guys are like, we're winning a title, or like we're back to the drawing board. It's a narrow scope of
It is.
success, and it's a hard way to live, but these guys are leaning into it completely because it's the thing that they chose. They chose greatness when they chose Ohio State.
That is the life. Chance for a really interesting Big Ten title game here, Joshua. And we're not going to assume anything, but we do have the number 1 and 2 teams in the country who are undefeated in Big Ten play. They're not playing in the regular season in Ohio State and Indiana. You and I were talking about expansion and this 12-team world and that kind of stuff a little bit before the show. So my 2-part question is this. What do you think an Ohio State-Indiana Big Ten championship game, if we do get a 12-0, 12-0 game between those teams, in the state of Indiana, a home state game for the Hoosiers? Ohio State in Indianapolis is practically Ohio State's second home when it comes to football games. What would that mean? But also, the idea that probably the winner of that game, the winner of that game will be the 1 seed in the playoff. The loser's probably the 3 seed, and both get buys the way they changed the playoff structure this year. Is it possible that even as great as that game has the potential to be on the field, will there be something lacking because the stakes are not super high? Where's your mind about a potential Buckeyes-Hoosiers matchup in Indy?
I'll go to the second part first. It's one of the things that I've been troubled with in terms of playoff expansion is this idea of, well, we have more important games. And like, what does that more important game look like? Well, it's Vanderbilt playing Missouri that all of a sudden has stakes, and like, people are supposed to be bought into that. But we're going to play a game in Indianapolis where a champion will be crowned for the Big Ten. There was a trophy. There's going to be confetti that falls on the field. I have some of the confetti from over a decade ago in my home currently, right? Like, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And there are people who are like, which part of the bracket do you want to be in? I'm looking at the top part with the number 1 team when they're doing the release yesterday. I'm like, man, they're going to be in hell. You got Georgia, Alabama as it stands right now, and Oregon over there. And on the bottom, you got some teams where it's like, I feel like I got a better shot. So people are doing that. They talk about resting starters, which is something that I can't even wrap my mind around for a conference championship game. And so that's been minimized. And there are people that are throwing around different structures to try to create more buy-in for conference championship weekend. The idea to me, though, is that the stakes certainly aren't as high as they are historically in the Big Ten. Now, for the Big 12 championship game, that's going to be a big deal, right? Like, you feel like that's huge. ACC might be their only shot, is whoever wins that conference. So it absolutely is a big deal there. For the Big Ten and SEC, nobody gives a damn anymore, and that's unfortunate. Now, in terms of Ohio State, Indiana being the matchup, it's for 2 things for me. It stands out as, number 1, this Indiana thing that happened a year ago and now has sustained, right? Like, I think we as a viewing public have to change the way that we think about and talk about Indiana. And part of that to me is, close win against Iowa, close win against Penn State. And the way that we talk about that with Indiana versus if it was Ohio State that did the same thing, right? Like, our minds still haven't completely wrapped around this idea that Indiana is every bit as good as any of the other contenders, right? Like, you can put them in the conversation next to Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State. And I think we still struggle to conceptualize that thing. The other part about it is Ohio State back in the Big Ten championship game, right? Like,
It's been a while, man.
It's been a little bit, and it feels weird that we have to say it like that. But like, for as good as Ohio State has been in the Ryan Day tenure, it's been a little while since the Buckeyes have been back to Indianapolis. So to me, that's always going to be a big deal, and it's one of the goals that they talk about achieving there. And the thing that would stand in the way of them doing that is the thing that has hurt them the last handful of years. It's the Michigan game. Right.
Yes.
And so I think there's so much excitement there about that potential matchup and the roads of how the teams get there. But I think in the big picture, right, like Ohio State's in right now. In the big picture, Indiana's in right now. And that's just kind of the way it is.
Do you think I usually talk about these situations in the context of, okay, it's not as punitive for the loser in situations like this. It's not a knockout game. Your season's not ruined. And that's the main change for everything that's happened in college football, that one game isn't ruining your season the way that for most of the sport, that's how it was. But I always say, okay, like if your favorite thing about the sport is, oh, I loved it when one loss would ruin somebody's season. I love seasons being ruined. It's like, is that really what you loved? And then also for that 3.5 hour span, when you get the two teams on the field, if you have two 12-0 teams on the field, I always think the fans are really going to care. And more importantly, the players and coaches are really going to care. They're going to want to win that game. What would it even look like? Do you, as a player, you understand this far better than I would. Could you go into the game and think like, well, this game matters, but actually we're still going to be in the playoff no matter what? Like somehow that will affect how I play. Is that possible? As a player, that maybe I would hold back in some way, or is that impossible that once the ball is snapped and you're out there in a big time game, you're just going?
Yeah, I think you're just going. Like I don't know what that, for me, I don't know if that could ever creep in. Like it's, football inherently you have to play as hard as you can to be successful, and it's a dangerous sport if you're not playing as hard as you can. It's dangerous already. So I think from that standpoint, everybody's bought in. Like, do you like the thing that would have to happen is the coach would just have to make a decision and say we're rolling with the backups.
Yes.
In a situation where it's like, are we in or are we out? Right? Like, does it matter if we win the game? And I don't think anybody's ready to do that quite yet. We see it in the NFL where teams have already made the playoffs, and you get to that last week of the regular season and they're rolling with the backups. I'm not sure that college football is at that point, and I don't want it to be at that point. Real quick on the one loss ruins the season thing. I don't think anybody ever was like, I want seasons ruined, but I think we appreciated urgency, which feels like it's not as, it doesn't feel as urgent sometimes, the outcomes of games where teams aren't knocked out. But I also think that we, as a college football viewing public, had an understanding that not everybody can be or should be a championship contender. That this sport isn't built off of this idea that everybody's good enough to win a title. I think for a long time, we got very comfortable saying that we had, the high bowl games, the New Year's Six or whatever it is, and then you had the tier below that, and teams are going to Outback Bowl or Gator Bowl and would hang a banner for that. And then you had, some of the other games, and if you were a team that was 6-6, you were very happy to be there. And if you were a team that was 10-2, you were happy to be in whatever bowl you got. And maybe there were a handful of teams that came up short on conference championship weekend, which we did in 2013. Didn't beat Michigan State in the Big Ten title, and we're playing in the Orange Bowl, and we're kind of pissed about that. But it was probably 2 or 3 teams that felt that way, and 2 or 3 fan bases that felt that way. And most of the rest of college football was like, yeah, I'm perfectly fine understanding that we don't have to win a title. And I think we've gotten to a place now where Penn State fires their coach and says that the next coach has to win a title. And LSU is a place that's won titles, but they're looking for a championship coach. And so is Florida. And the question that I would ask is, there's only one championship every year. Like, is everybody, should that be the goal for as many programs as that is the goal for now?
Yeah, I do think we have to, as a sport, appreciate making the playoff. I always say, like in college basketball, you hang Sweet 16 banners, to hand Final Four banners. It isn't championship or bust. When you talk about Mike Krzyzewski, you don't only talk about championships, you talk about other levels of achievement. I do think college football has to get there. I do think some of the trade-off, and everything about college football right now is about trade-offs, right? Is that you certainly have lost some urgency from the regular season. You couldn't deny that. But then I think, for instance, the urgency of the 4-game run that Ohio State made in the playoff last year, like that's what you gained. It's like, okay, well, we lost some September, October, November urgency, but we've added a level of December, January urgency that never existed in this sport before. So it is all about trade-offs. If you were in charge of college football, what would your playoff be? Would it be 4? Would it be 12? Would it be 16? What would you do?
I'm taking it back. I'm shrinking the
are.
playoff. I am. And I think anytime we brought up expansion, and like, I'll just put this out here. The first beneficiary of college football playoff expansion sitting right here. Yep. We're not winning a title in 14 if it didn't go to 4 teams that year, right? Yep. So like I understand what this does for the sport and how maybe there are some teams that aren't number 1 or number 2 that are capable of winning a title and should have the opportunity. 6 always felt like the number for me. I feel like the cut line every year is somewhere in that 4 to maybe 6, 7, 8 range. And so the 7th and 8th team, I am not going to feel bad. And that was Ohio State last year, by the way. So, which if they would have straight seeded it, different thing. But anyway, like, can't feel bad if you don't get in, but you can talk me into this idea of maybe 6 teams that are year in, year out. You're like, that team absolutely can win a title. And you can set it up to where the number 1 and number 2 teams get a bye. And you got 3 and 6 and 4 and 5 playing. The thing that's going to happen is we're going to go to more teams, which give me as much football as possible. Like, all the complaining that I'm doing, guy number 1 that's going to be sitting in a stadium or in front of a TV watching the games is me. Like, I'm never going to be mad that I get to watch a sport that I love. But I feel like we're getting a little bit carried away here. We gotta measure what we're doing as a sport.
It's hard because it's like I like 12, but then I wouldn't like 24. And it's like, okay, well, we're all like, everybody draws a line somewhere. I think they've done a pretty decent job. I think there are some high stakes games here in the last 3 weeks of the regular season as people are fighting to get in or make sure they don't fall out. If you go too far, you could get to the point where you have 14 teams by the end of October who know they're in the playoff if you're in a 24-team playoff. And then what is November about? Like that, I do think they have to be careful. And are you nervous? You and I were talking about a little bit, like, we know the money in the sport. We know that when you all of a sudden, finally, thank goodness, are paying your labor force, that changes the economics of everything. But it feels like there is a lot of like desperation for every last dollar that I do think. Do you think it could harm the sport if we're not careful, if the people in charge aren't careful?
I think it would sterilize the sport, right? And that's what the thing that makes college football different than watching the professional version of the sport is stadiums and bands and atmosphere and urgency, right? Like we watch in the NFL where there are teams that have a record below 500 that make it to the playoffs. And we are okay with that because we understand that it's balanced league and there's parity, whatever the case is. That just feels wrong to me in general. Like, if you can't have success in the regular season, I certainly don't want to watch you in the postseason. And I don't want to water down or sterilize the sport of college football. I want the rabid fans to be out there. I want the urgency. I want people on Twitter freaking out. I love the lunatic fringe. I love that kind of stuff. Like, you're cutting their legs out, and these people they're lunatics. I'm one of them. I'm one of the people. So they're gonna find things to whine about. But like, that's part of what makes this thing really good. I'll say this: it's not just the money in the sport, though. The money is part of how we get to this. Everything has to make economic sense, and we live in a society where you have to maximize the economics of every situation. But it's the fact that there's not really a centralized way to govern this sport.
Yeah,
the conferences all operate independently and try to come together and make decisions. And by the way, when they come together, it's basically Sankey and Petiti that are telling everybody else what they want with maybe some input. And I think that the sport would be much better if you can centralize power and not have conferences that are advocating for their own selfish wants and needs of how it would enrich them and make them better. So again, like I think college football, one of the flaws of the sport is the structure was so rigid for so long that when it had to change, the sport was not prepared.
Agreed.
Wasn't prepared for conference expansion, wasn't prepared for NIL, wasn't prepared for transfer portal, wasn't prepared for a society that said we can't just have kids out here that are basically under the thumb of a large institution working for free with no ability to move. It wasn't ready to address any of that. And so now we're in a scenario that's very chaotic.
Yeah, we went from completely rigid to completely wide open. It's like now everybody, if you want to change conferences, if you want to change teams as a player, if you want to have an NIL contract, but then leave for somebody else and still get paid and no one's in charge of enforcing anything, that, I understand why it swung that way because it was the other way for too long. But we've got to get back to a middle. But again, the way that you get back to that is with some kind of structure and governance, which is people in charge who are thinking about holistically for the sport, and then some kind of bargaining between the people, the ADs and the school presidents and the labor force who have representation. And you get to that point where you're coming to agreements and compromises. And right now, that's not how the sport runs.
So let's talk about that real quick. The idea of collective bargaining in collegiate athletics scares the hell out of me because I look at it, the NFL to me has one of the weakest player unions because it's such a big league. There are a lot of players and there's a wide gap in income where you've got guys that are making over $50 million a year and you've got guys who are on minimum contracts. And so how would you bargain? Is it a conference to conference thing? And then you do it through individual sports? Is it a university thing? I don't think that I would like for and this is no shade to any of the programs, but the Purdue linebacker is not bargaining on my behalf. We're not the same. Right.
Agreed.
And so like this is part of the thing that I'm talking. You look at all of the obstacles to the new world of this sport right now. It's really intriguing when you start to really dig into it.
Yeah, I hope I have a belief that it'll figure it out one way or another. But a lot of the things, it feels like, unfortunately, in college football, some of the best things that happen, they stumble into. And it's like, man, now this seems to be working. It's like, was this a plan? It's like, oh no, this was not a plan at all. I don't know how we got here.
End up making a lot of money, which is insane. Like, I wish I could stumble into a check like that.
Last thing before I let you go. I think neither you nor I love the let's hand Fernando Mendoza the Heisman because they had a drive at the end of the Penn State game. I just keep thinking, what's going to decide the Heisman? The Ohio State-Indiana Big Ten championship game. Because are you going to, if Ohio State beats Indiana, are you going to vote for Fernando Mendoza over Julian Sayin or vice versa? And people got a little over their skis, did they not?
Yeah, they did. And I've had Indiana fans blowing me up, which I love to see that. Like, again, this is part of one of the benefits of this expanded playoff era that I don't love very much is you have an Indiana that's like, their fans are all in it. And they've been really good. They've done what they need to do. A Heisman moment to me, I think, is an overrated way to look at that award because you have these vast bodies of work for players, and we're going to distill it down to, a minute and 40 seconds that happened in one game. That's an insane thing to do to begin with. But for that moment to be considered in a game where the quarterback threw an interception that led to points, he was 9 of 19 in the second half of that game. And it was against a team that was 3-6. In 4 of the 6 losses came where they had a lead under 5 minutes, a team that just cannot close out games. That to me does not feel like a Heisman moment. This isn't saying I think any less of Fernando Mendoza after that.
Agreed.
I think he's right there in the mix. You're not going to see me crowning him after what he did on that field. That's just not enough for me.
Yeah. Great job by the players. Sometimes the way the media reacts is nuts.
It's Joshua insane. Perry Gus was insane.
Gus, we love Gus. There's nobody who's more prisoner of the moment than Gus Johnston, which is what makes him great. But also, awesome. don't listen to him for Heisman advice. Right. Joshua Perry, NBC Sports. You can find him on Twitter, Mr. Joshua Perry. We know you're busy. We love what you're doing. Congratulations on everything, and thanks for joining us here on the Bill and Doug Show.
I appreciate your time.